Hi, you're listening to Stefan Livera podcast. Are you curious about how the mempool is going to evolve and what impact that will have on Bitcoin? Today, I speak with Wiz and Simon of the Mempool.space project, a really great Bitcoin visualizer, and it's great for targeting the fees that you're going to use. So we talk about how the project got started, what the impact of it will be in terms of Bitcoin and the multi-layer ecosystem that we're moving towards. So I think you'll really enjoy this one. This show brought to you by Swan Bitcoin, the fastest way to go from zero to Bitcoin. They've got easy sign up, it's really cheap, there's no altcoins, and it is available in all states in the US. A common way people get started is establishing their initial position with a one-time buy and then start dollar cost averaging with automatic recurring buys. Swan Bitcoin was built to do just this. You can create a recurring purchase plan like $100 a week or $20 a day, and you can also make one-time buys. Swan supports bank wires and ACH transfers. Swan is the best place to send your friends and family when they are ready to start buying Bitcoin. There is a specific focus on self-custody and learning the important aspects of Bitcoin. So send them to swanbitcoin.com/Livera, and Swan will drop $10 of free Bitcoin into their account when they become a member. That's swanbitcoin.com/Livera. Are you thinking about your Bitcoin security? Well, consider multi-signature with Unchained, building Bitcoin native financial services and providing services like multi-signature vaults designed for ultra-secure long-term storage with no setup or storage fees if you build them on your own. Now, if you want guidance, they offer a concierge onboarding package, and that's available both for individuals and for businesses. So they will send you some hardware wallets. They'll teach you about multi-signature. They'll do calls with you while you initialize and set up the hardware wallets and the vault. And in doing so, you will then feel a lot more comfortable about how to use multi-signature because Unchained Capital makes it really easy for you. Unchained also offers an OTC service, and it's also a great choice if you're looking for self-directed Bitcoin retirement accounts. So move your personal or your corporate treasury to a Bitcoin standard. Go and check out unchained-capital.com. Take a look at CipherSafe.io, producing the Cipher Wheel product. So if you've got a Bitcoin hardware wallet, don't just rely on that piece of paper that you get with it. Slowly increase and improve your level of security and safety here by using a metal backup seed that is fireproof, waterproof, rustproof, petproof, and tamper evident. The Cipher Wheel is compact, it comes in a wheel shape, and you can get a padlock tamper evidence seal so you know if it's been opened. So you slide in the tiles to back up the words on your seed product. Make sure that you or your loved ones have access to your Bitcoins if an accident occurs. Go to CipherSafe.io and use the code Livera for a discount. Wiz and Simon, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
So Wiz, I think my listeners are already familiar with you, but let's hear from you, Simon. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I grew up in Sweden. I worked there as a software developer, but about 4 years ago, I decided to quit my day job and pursue a more nomadic lifestyle. So for the past 4 years, I've been mostly traveling and moving and living in different places around the world, and also got the time to really dive deeply into the Bitcoin space. And I realized I wanted to contribute something to the space, and that's why I'm working on the Mempool project full time.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think the whole Bitcoin nomad idea is something that's picking up a bit more steam as well. That there are more people who are talking about that as an idea, and it's become, I guess, more viable for people as well. So that's a pretty cool area. And Wiz, maybe just give a bit of an overview on yourself, just for listeners who might not have heard you before.
Yeah, sure. I'm a full-time Bitcoiner originally from Hawaii. Quit school really young to work at an ISP and stay home and chat with my friends on IRC. And, 20 years later, I'm still doing the same thing, just talk to my friends on the internet. And I still run my own ISP now with my own servers. And I run a bunch of Bitcoin nodes for BISC and Liquid. Now, even one of the Bitcoin DNS seeds. I'm also publishing the Bitcoin Standards Japanese edition coming out soon, and a few other random Bitcoin projects.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So for listeners, that's basically Wiz is running a lot of different operational infrastructure there in relation to different projects. So he's involved with BISC, which is a well-known peer-to-peer trading platform for people who want to trade Bitcoin. And he's also becoming a Bitcoin DNS seed. So we might get into that a bit later if we get some time. But for now, let's talk a little bit about the project, Mempool.space. So Just for listeners who aren't familiar, this is a great website to go and basically visualize the blockchain and see what's going on with it. So perhaps Simon, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got started on this?
Yeah, I guess you can start like from 2017 when it all became clear that the blockchain and the fees are not going to be for free anymore. And people aren't really knowledgeable on how it actually works. They make transactions, but they get stuck, but they don't really understand why. And so that's why I come up with like this idea of building like the original idea was like visualizing the blockchain, seeing the blocks coming in, and seeing how transactions getting processed by by the blockchain, basically. So you can actually, for the first time, visualize how it actually looks like, because people didn't have anything to relate to when it's come to that. So I coded the first version of the project in late 2018, and there was like a basic version with just transaction tracking and like this whole basic visualization of the blockchain. And then like 6 months later, Wiz contacted me, saw the project. He offered me to like host the project, and he persuaded me to, you have to open source this, man. And I released the code on GitHub, made it all open source, and we took it from there. And then we just decided to step it up.
Yeah. So Wiz, let's hear from your side. Tell us how you found out about this project and how you got started with it.
Right. Yeah. Like like what Simon said, I saw his Mempool visualizer website, and I thought it was really cool. And since I run a lot of Bitcoin nodes for various projects, I wanted to, just monitor my own mempool of my own Bitcoin nodes. And so I basically said, let's partner up on this project. Let's make it into a legit open source project. And he was, instantly very positive and totally agreed to do it. So like within a few days of talking, like we, made the GitHub project and put together like, basic installation instructions and screenshots and documentation. And we launched it. It was Mempool V1. That was pretty cool when we first launched it.
Now, one thing that's, I think, important to point out is up until this point, most block explorers were more about looking at historical transactions, and there wasn't as much of a focus on this idea of thinking about the mempool, right? So that's probably one important differentiator here, correct?
Yeah, I guess the mempool was never really relevant before 2017 or 2018. There was that so-called block size debate where, later we found that it was actually Bitmain doing this covert ASIC boost stuff and spamming the mempool with high fee transactions and all these other scandalous things we heard about. But for whatever reason, the mempool was just not relevant and never got full before that 2017, 2018 bull market run. And Simon's very innovative idea of visualizing the mempool as projected blocks was really cool. That was really unique, and there was nothing like it ever since.
Right, and I think perhaps that's a really good. I mean, you're probably the right person to ask on this as well, because you're a bit more of a Bitcoin OG yourself. But I think for listeners who maybe you're a little bit newer to the Bitcoin world, in the earlier days, because there was so many less people using Bitcoin in those days, it was much faster and easier to just kind of get your transactions through. Whereas, in that kind of 2016 and 2017 and era, it started to become more like, hey, there's actually congestion here. Now we actually need to start thinking about fees on the blockchain. So perhaps, Wiz, do you want to maybe give us a bit of context there in terms of what's happened with fees, transaction fees to use Bitcoin over the years?
I guess if you go back to the early days, I remember when I first started in like 2013 or so, you could actually do a zero fee transaction. And around that time, that's when they realized that was a bad idea for spamming or just denial of service attacks or whatever, and added a minimum fee. And I think it was just hard coded at like 0.001 Bitcoin per transaction. Regardless,
the value was a lot lower then, right?
Yes, it was a lot cheaper, and it was a lot. It didn't matter how big the transaction was. And then after that, they changed to this satoshis per byte, and then later, I think satoshis per virtual byte when SegWit came along, and you have weight units and all these fancy things now. But it's been an interesting almost, I guess, 8 or 9 years now of how the fee market's been slowly developing in the Bitcoin ecosystem, and now we're kind of transitioning to this period where the mempool is always going to be congested, and you always have to bid against other transactions for the getting included into the next block.
And Simon, anything to add there just on the fee market or the block space market dynamics over the years?
No, I basically joined the Bitcoin space in 2017, so it was already congested and stuff. And I guess I didn't find any good way of see what's happening with my transaction. And so we are like in this huge transition right now. We're gonna transition to a multi-layer Bitcoin ecosystem. And that's what the vision of the Mempool.space project is about now. We're not just supporting the base layer, but we need to support all the other layers and help people in this transition, help people find the right fee, help people make an optimized fee, optimized transactions. I focus a lot on that.
Yep. And so I think this is one of those things where in the earlier days when everything was still viable on chain, people didn't have to think about these things. So they would do small transactions on chain. But now we actually have to start thinking a little bit more deeply about what Bitcoin is and what it is best suited for. And, if listeners check out some of the episodes with someone like VJ Boyaparty, he would explain to something like, hey, it's actually, we need to think of it more like it's settlement layer, or Bitcoin layer 1 is more like settlement layer. And some of the smaller transactions will happen in other layers. So perhaps you guys want to expand on that kind of idea and tell us a little bit about, what you think is what you think that's going to look like.
Yeah, to me now, the block space is extremely scarce, and people don't really realize, like, if for example, if you run a Bitcoin node yourself, you'll start to realize that you need to keep a copy of every transaction that ever occurred, like forever, and store it on your hard drive. So that is what you're paying for when you're making a transaction. And if you look at it that way, like $5 isn't that much, actually. You're paying to be included and secured and stored in the world's most distributed and secure ledger. So when and that is going to be, so it's going to be a fee market, and all the, like, I hope that the coffee payments are already priced out of Bitcoin, because I don't see the reason why we should store all the people's coffee payments like on all the nodes around the world. It doesn't make any sense, right? So those could be stored on Lightning, for example, or be transacted over Lightning. And we are just in this huge transition period when we have a lot of infrastructure that's not upgraded. We have a lot of use of non-SegWit. We have a lot of transactions that doesn't support fee bumping. And Lightning it really needs to be activated, implemented on like exchanges and stuff. So it's going to be about like a very rough period, like the coming years, I believe, that the transaction fees are going to go up and down, be very volatile. So I think the tool we're building is like helping people really navigate this transition and this volatility that's happening.
Yeah, if you look at any project that was developed past 5 or 6 years in the Bitcoin ecosystem, a lot of them made this false assumption that Bitcoin transactions would always be cheap, which in hindsight is kind of silly, because I think all Bitcoiners now understand why Bitcoin is valuable, right? It's the first true form of digital scarcity. But, if BTC is valuable because there's only 21 million BTC, well, then the space in the Bitcoin's blockchain, which also has a very finite limitation, is also going to become very valuable. So, on one side, you have this increasing demand for users who want to create new Bitcoin transactions. But more importantly, if everyone understands that number is going to go up and Bitcoin transaction fees are denominated in Bitcoin, then those two numbers kind of multiply each other. The price in Satoshis per byte of your transactions will go up, and the price of dollars for a Bitcoin will go up. So Bitcoin transactions, we've already seen it go up like 100x since I've been around. Since it was like 5 cents to do a Bitcoin transaction a few years back, and now it's like $5 to do a Bitcoin transaction. Probably in another 5, 6, 7, 8 years, it could be like $500 to do a Bitcoin transaction, depending on how certain apps and use cases get optimized or don't get optimized. Take BISC for example. They every BISC trade is like 4 on-chain transactions, and until very recently, it wasn't even using SegWit. It was very unoptimized. And so, if you want to buy $100 of Bitcoin on BISC, you would have had to pay like $10 or $20 just in the mining fees. So it already had priced out those $100 trades. And so a lot of these apps are just going to have to adapt. They're going to have to change to this transition of where the mempool is just always going to be congested. Fee market is going to become very expensive, and it's in everyone's interest to kind of optimize their transactions, batch all their transactions together, and so that we're not all bidding against each other so aggressively and driving the price up for everyone.
Right. And so it's a very complicated topic because there's so many moving pieces or moving parts going on here. So one example is exchanges might start batching all the withdrawals. And so that may help the fee pressure dramatically, as opposed to in the past where they were just doing single transactions for each person. And I guess the first level thing that people might be thinking is, oh, but hang on, Wiz and Simon, why can't I just do one sat per VByte and then wait for it to get confirmed? Why can't I just do that?
Yeah, that's a common misconception, right? Is that, okay, I have a very low time preference. I don't care when my transaction gets confirmed, so I'll just use the absolute minimum fee of 1 sat per byte and just wait. Well, the thing about the mempool is that the mempool has a default size of 300 megabytes in Bitcoin Core. And so the lowest fee transactions will actually get kicked out of the mempool once it hits 300 megabytes. And so this is actually one of the newer features we're going to be adding to the site. But basically, the other day, I think it was up to 4 sats per byte. Anything below that was getting purged. So yeah, I mean, you just can't. This is like a common misconception. I could see how people, started using Bitcoin sometime in the past 5 years, and they could always get away with doing this. But that just like 0 fee transactions are not a thing anymore, 1 sat per byte transactions are not really going to be a thing anymore. And we're going to see the market very volatile.
Paul Catan, my friend, my co-founder of Ministry of Nodes, he's famous for his one sat maximalism. But I guess we'll see. So there's a few, pieces to tease apart with this whole one sat conversation. So one example would be, hold on, Wiz, why can't I just go one sat but enable this special feature called replace by fee? And so I might lowball at the start and then do an RBF replace by fee, so long as that feature is enabled and that my wallet supports this feature. That I could use that.
Yeah, that's a good point. You can use RBF with a cheap fee and then increase it if necessary. And that's a pretty good strategy, but not all wallets and use cases support RBF. For example, if you're sending from one centralized exchange to the other, you can't really RBF it or even CPFP, a child pay for parent. And there's also this other problem right now where if you want to bump the fee of a transaction using CPFP, child pays for parent, if your original transaction got purged from the mempool, you can't actually bump the fee for it. I think my friend Gloria right now just got a grant to do this package mempool accept. We'll be able to submit multiple transactions into the mempool at the same time to address this problem. But my understanding is that once the minimum fee of the mempool has risen to, above the fee rate of your now purge transaction, you can't rebroadcast it even if you're bumping it with another transaction. And so, and that might be a couple of years until that gets fixed. So there's just a bunch of things that need to get improved all over the infrastructure of the Bitcoin kind of economy here.
Yeah, right. And I guess one other point just while we're here is that the 300 megabyte default, as you mentioned, it's possible for some nodes to manually configure that to be bigger. They might say, okay, I'm going to allocate 1 gigabyte or whatever. And I know as well that there are for example, there are mining pools that offer this as a service. So I think pushtx.com is one example where you can go there, tell them this transaction, and then pay them a fee out of band, meaning you might pay them with Lightning to accelerate one of your transactions such that the next time they come across it, they can try to manually bump it in their own and ensure that it goes into a block. And I guess this is just one example of how the ecosystem might evolve over time. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that's a really good point. A lot of these mining pools, it's kind of like a secondary market for space in the Bitcoin blockchain is going to emerge. And we're probably going to add this feature on the site at some point. But yeah, I mean, there just needs to be a better way out of band, like you said, for people who want to manually prioritize a transaction. And, if people make mistakes or, they can't bump the fee for whatever reason, and say the market's moving and the mempool's congested and they really need this transaction to get confirmed, there's a market for that. Those people would be willing to pay a fee to have it manually prioritized. And so definitely the future of the Bitcoin mempool space market, blockchain space market will develop, as you say.
And while we're on this topic as well, it's probably also good to talk about fee estimation. So why is this a hard problem?
Well, yeah, the biggest problem is that you don't know when the blocks are gonna arrive. It's total random. It should be like over time. It's one block per 10 minutes. But if you like go to Mempool.space and look when the blocks are arriving, you can get like 3 blocks in a row within 1 minute, and then it takes an hour for the next block. And during all of this time, the Mempool is just getting congested, and so you have no clue of knowing like when. And also not just that, like all the transactions are coming in, new transactions are coming in with different various of fees. So like all of a sudden you have like big players. I know like BitMEX, for example, like on Mondays they will on a specific time they will dump a huge amount of transactions in the mempool. So it's impossible to foresee all this stuff. So that's why it's also impossible to do fee estimation. And most of the traditional fee estimation tools are using like a statistical approach so that you can get a probability. Like if I use this fee, I will have a probability of 95% of having it confirmed within 30 minutes or something like that. But the Mempool website has a more Mempool-based fee estimation system, which is different. Like some people love it and some other people maybe don't, but it's like up to preference. But basically, we're looking at how the Mempool looks like and show you like what do you need right now to get into the next. And that is reasonably accurate. I mean, I know, and because the Mempool is so volatile, you can have one block with a super low fee and then the next block with a higher fee. So we are our estimation is more like dynamic, fluctuates more than the traditional, and we have received a lot of feedback, people really liking our approach and have been able to reduce their fees a lot because they are able to see like a snapshot. What does the mempool look right now? Okay, I'll put this transaction fee. If it gets into the next block, if I get lucky within 10 minutes, yeah, I didn't have to pay that much of a fee.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When I first started working on the Bisq project, all the Bisq nodes were, I think, using earn.com's fee estimation API. And when it didn't matter, it was okay. But as soon as the mempool started to get congested, like within the past 6 or 8 months, users really got upset because the API was so like horribly inaccurate, And that's around the time, and it's also like a centralized point of failure for the Bisq network anyway. So it was a really cool use case of the mempool project to have several fee estimation API backends now running by several different Bisq contributors and using the real-time mempool data to very accurately tell you, like updated every few seconds, what fee you should use. And that really improved the Bisq network's just flow, because with Bisq network, since there's so many on-chain transactions, if a transaction gets stuck in the mempool, it would really disrupt some trades. And Bisq UX is already kind of clunky because it's totally decentralized. So you want to improve as many things as you can to make it as smooth as possible for people to stack sats without a centralized party, and having a decentralized project like the mempool fee estimation was really important.
Great. And how would the fee estimation using Mempool.space differ from, say, fee estimation that might be in my Bitcoin wallet?
Yeah, like I said, we're using the mempool-based fee estimation, and some tools do that. So it's like differ from tool to tool. As I think the majority are using like a more statistical approach, and those usually give you a higher fee. But yeah, you have to see which wallet you're looking at. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, it really depends on the wallet implementation, right? Even Core, like Bitcoin Core's fee estimation, I found was not nearly as accurate as Mempool.space's, just because of the way it uses the projected blocks and it takes the medium fee. It's a pretty simple algorithm we have in there now, and it could still be improved in a lot of ways, but it's surprisingly already the best in my experience.
Great. And so in terms of tools that users are using other than Mempool.space, what sort of tools are they using, and how would you contrast that with the Mempool.space approach?
I guess when it comes to block explorers, most of the block explorers out there, or the popular ones, are not even open source, right? So if you don't want to use like a totally closed source, centralized website that's probably logging all of your queries and using all kinds of third-party trackers and analytics, it's really cool to have an open source tool that you can even just self-host locally and not have to trust anybody, connect to your own node. So if you're looking for tools, even if it's not fee estimation or block exploring, just to like be able to know that someone's not logging your data and connect it to your own full node is really huge. And if you have a tool like that with a really slick UX and design, I think you can have the best of both worlds, where it's fast and local and self-sovereign.
Yeah, so a good example there would be if, let's say, the listener has sent a Bitcoin transaction and they're waiting for that to actually get confirmed. And now in that time, they might be out there copy pasting the transaction hash into a block explorer. And if they're not using some kind of anonymization technique like Tor or VPN and so on, at that point, they may be doxing certain aspects of, oh, hey, this IP address is interested in this Bitcoin transaction. Where if that user is using their own block explorer, then that's where you're saying, as you're saying, that user can reduce the amount of leakage of info because now they're only looking up on their own computer.
Yeah, that's why I've had this focus since the beginning, actually, that you should be able to run this whole Mempool Explorer locally on your own node. And it's just this, we just recently released the latest version, right? And since it's a bit different from the original one, it took some more effort to make it adapted to run on a regular node, but we just finished that work now. So I think Wiz can talk more about that.
Yeah, so so I think the ecosystem is going to have to transition, and so we may see more tension come, and that may in some way drive the use of Lightning. It may drive, unfortunately, we don't want this, but it may drive more use of custodial services and potentially things like sidechains like Liquid. So perhaps Wiz, do you want to spell out what some of those implications might look like as this ecosystem matures?
Yeah, I guess it'll be interesting to see how it develops. Like the most obvious common use case is something like in USA they have Venmo or Cash App or PayPal, where it's just totally centralized database. And if you want to send money to your friends, either it's fiat or Sats. It's just kind of like updating a database entry in essentially what's a bank, fully custodial thing. And up from that a little bit, like you said, you have side chains like Liquid, where you have these kind of IOU tokens that I think it's pretty cool because on a sidechain like Liquid, you can verify that not only how much Bitcoin they're holding, but also the liabilities. So in other words, you can verify all the Bitcoin holdings, but also all the IOU token holdings, and you can run the numbers and make sure that they match up, and you can very easily see that they're not running like a fractional reserve or anything like this. The sidechains also have cool features like confidential transactions or base layer privacy, like 1 minute block times, of course, very low fees. And you can also do like some kind of basic smart contract functionality or atomic swaps of other assets like USD, fiat coin assets to Sats and things like that. So there's a bunch of really cool stuff on like Liquid that you can't do on other things. And then on the most extreme, like the most distributed, you have Lightning, right? Which of course is this layer 2 payment network. It's fully distributed. There is no blockchain at all, and you're just kind of settling on chain every once in a while if you need to. So there's like a full spectrum, sliding scale of centralization to decentralization to being fully distributed in this layer 2 ecosystem, and they all kind of have their trade-offs in terms of security and privacy and freedom and censorship resistance and verifiability, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so for listeners interested in more in-depth around Liquid, check out my earlier episode with Alan Piscatello from the Blockstream team, and he explains it kind of like a fancy multi-sig bank, if you will, but different trade-offs, obviously. So, have a listen to that as well. But I guess Wiz and Simon, do you have any comments there around how Mempool.space is going to help enable the user be a functioning, member in this coin ecosystem across the different layers?
Well, we started with just supporting the Bitcoin blockchain, right? And then we added support for Liquid. And I think the next big project for this year is going to be adding like a Lightning Explorer. And then we can like connect everything together. So we already support this. Like if you make like a Liquid transaction and you do a peg out to Bitcoin, then you can just click a link and you get redirected to the Bitcoin transaction where it actually got settled. So it's all interconnected in like the same multi-layer ecosystem like this.
Very cool. And so maybe, Wiz, could you tell us a little bit about some of the operations of the website and keeping it running as a community resource?
Yeah, it's pretty impressive how popular the site has gotten over the past year or so since we started supporting like full block explorer functionality, and especially most recently as the mempool has just been constantly congested over the past month or two. Now we're seeing like over 50,000 daily active users, and a lot of like wallet apps or exchange networks like Bisq or many others not only are integrating with our APIs or linking to our block explorer so that users can easily look up their transaction and see where it is in the mempool. But they're actually setting us as like the default block explorer, which is really humbling. I think Phoenix Wallet by Async, which is this really, really slick Lightning wallet. I was very surprised to check out the wallet and click on a transaction and have it open on Mempool.space. And it's just so heartwarming to see the community really embrace the Mempool project and integrate with it so much. But operationally, like we've got a bunch of donations from community sponsors, and we use those funds to purchase a bunch more servers. We're actually in the process of setting up the Mempool to be its own ISP. Right now, it's hosted on my ISP, so it's self-hosted by me right now. But we want Mempool to be, totally self-hosted. So once Mempool becomes its own ISP, that'll be really cool. Anyone is welcome to set up their own Mempool node as well if you want to take some. If you don't want to route your request to our servers, right? I mean, of course, we operate the service like freely for the community, especially over Tor. But it's always best to run your own instance, so you don't need to trust us.
Back to the show in a moment. Knox is a Bitcoin custodian dedicated to ensuring comprehensive insurance coverage for client assets. Much of what passes as insurance today isn't purchased for the sake of protection, but for pure marketing reasons. Knox believes insurance should exist to make fund recovery possible, no sharing coverage between customers. Knox takes a unique approach when it comes to purchasing insurance for customer assets. Coverage is set aside exclusively for every customer in a one-to-one capacity, all with a comprehensive policy covering a range of loss and theft events, including internal collusion. If you are a Bitcoin company, RIA, fund, trust, or family office, make sure to contact Knox to discuss Bitcoin custody and insurance. That website is knoxcustody.com. And finally, Lend at HODL HODL is a global Bitcoin-backed lending platform, so you can lend and borrow anonymously on your own terms. This is a peer-to-peer solution using multi-signature escrow for each deal. So if you have Bitcoin and you don't want to spend, you can keep on hodling and you can pay interest in stablecoins. On the other hand, if you have stablecoins such as USDT, you can create an offer and earn interest by lending that stablecoin on the Lend platform. So with this platform, you set your own terms and you put up offers depending on how long you want to borrow or lend and the interest rates. Go and check it out at lend.hodlhodl.com. Back to the show. Great. And so for the users who are less technical, or maybe they don't have as much time to go and manually run it, the other cool part is you guys integrated into some of the well-known Raspberry Pi projects as well. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how users can make use of that feature or make use of that?
Yeah, I guess we just shipped the Mempool v2, Explorer suite on Raspberry Pi Blitz, and that's the first Raspberry Pi platform we're supporting. We're working on the Umbro App Store integration now, and after that, probably Ronin Dojo, Start9 Labs, maybe even MyNode. We have to see if we can get working with the BTC Pay Server Docker environment too. But yeah, we hope to be on all of the popular Bitcoin full node distributions for Raspberry Pi soon. So it'll be as simple as just clicking one button and having that Mempool app installed on your Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, and as I recall, even I think MyNode definitely had V1 on there. I think it does still have that. And so I guess, was there any question around like the processing and the capability of the Raspberry Pi nodes to be able to run that on top of Bitcoin and Lightning and whatever other applications they might be using?
Yeah, we have to do a lot of tricks. Like we're using Bitcoin Core for a lot of requests, and then we have to use the built-in bundled Electrum server for the address lookups. So it's like we're like mixing and matching to get it almost the same features as on the Mempool.space website. So, but you get all the basic feature like transaction tracking. You can view scripts. You can do most of the advanced stuff. It's just some of the high performance stuff that doesn't really work. Like you can't open like an address containing thousands of transactions. Then there's usually like a limit in the Electrum server and stuff. So there's a few limitations like that, usually related to performance.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the trade-off of Raspberry Pi being very inexpensive hardware is that it doesn't have a lot of horsepower. So like for the Mempool.space website, we have a cluster of several very powerful servers with very fast, non-volatile memory drives and tons of RAM and powerful CPUs to index literally everything and keep it in RAM. So when you use the Mempool.space website, you can view any address, even if it has millions of transactions, and it'll just load instantly. But I think the limitation on the Raspberry Pi is like 100 or 1,000 transactions per address now. And if it's more than that, I think the Raspberry Pi just gives up and says, well, you can look at this on Mempool.space or another instance, but as a Raspberry Pi, that's all I can really do, right?
Yeah, of course. And I think anyone who's doing really hardcore level of transactions all off one address and things, those kinds of people can go run like a fuller instance themselves. So I think for the typical home user, retail level, just like a family kind of person or that kind of group of people who are going to just be using a Raspberry Pi, I think that that makes a lot of sense as well for the typical kind of customer. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really perfect for a home user because most wallet apps these days, they don't reuse addresses anyway. So on a single Bitcoin address in your wallet, you might only have a few transactions. So Mempool Spaces on a Raspberry Pi is totally sufficient for looking up your own transactions. I mean, there's no way, the average person is going to have millions of transactions on a single address, right? That's the most extreme use case.
Yeah, of course, of course. So how would Mempool.space differ with some of the other kind of older block explorers in the space?
I guess the oldest is probably blockchain.info, right? Which is a fully closed source, centralized explorer/wallet backend. I guess they were like the first like serious one, so that's why they have a lot of users still. But I mean, they have a lot of shit coins. They have a lot of airdrops. They have a lot of like advertisements. It's like they didn't really add SegWit. They were supporting like Bcash and I think even Ripple or something. I don't know, but they're just not really like the best members of the Bitcoin community, right? Like you can tell it's a typical for-profit company. They're trying to increase the value of the shareholders' wealth and things like that. Obviously, the contrast to that is like Mempool being an open source project. Just give away all the code for free, and there's no ads, there's no shitcoins. It's just pure. It's like BTC Pay in the sense that Tula very famously tweeted at BitPay, "I'm going to obsolete you," and sure enough, he just hacks a bunch of code together, and now BTC Pay is like the de facto way to take Bitcoin payments. Like, why would you use BitPay, despite them being this, big company with millions of dollars of VC? Why would you use a company like BitPay that has full KYC and all these restrictions when you can just, one click install it on BTC Pay on a Raspberry Pi and everything works? And that's what we're trying to do with the Mempool project, right? Is kind of obsolete these BitPay style block explorer websites. It should, a block explorer should be an app. It's not supposed to be like a bank that you have to fully trust with all of your data or all of your self-sovereignty, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's interesting that in the earlier days, a lot of things had to be just done by some more centralized service. And over the years, as things are maturing, it's becoming easier and easier for the user to become more self-sovereign, right? And so I think it's like there's a suite of software and projects and hardware as well that are enabling people to become like, the early days, the saying was, Bitcoin, be your own bank. That's really what it was. How do you see Mempool fitting in as part of that, call it full stack of apps?
Yeah, that's a good name for it, right? The Bitcoin full stack, where on a Raspberry Pi you have Bitcoin and Lightning and Electrum server and BTC Pay and maybe Bisq pretty soon, and now Mempool tool. And there's a bunch of other apps like coin mixing or all of these random applications that are all part of this open source ecosystem. And this full stack allows you to do everything. Like you said, Bitcoin is you can be your own bank. Maybe Lightning is your own Visa or MasterCard payment network, and BTC Pay is like your own payment processor like Square or something like that. And Bisq is to be your own Bitcoin exchange. And now Mempool, you can be your own explorer and your own fee estimation backend, your own everything, right? So I guess that's the goal is of a Bitcoin full stack, is to kind of eliminate that dependence on companies and just use open source apps that are self-hosted on your own hardware with your own keys and no KYC or anything to infringe on your personal rights.
Yeah. Now, one other thing that can be a bit difficult for people in the space now, maybe not so much for the listeners of this show, they tend to be more, hardcore, tend to be a little bit more either technical or motivated to learn, but it is something we have to think about because Bitcoin Twitter and, SLP listeners are not representative of Bitcoin holders everywhere. And in many cases, the family members are dependent on the technical person in that family running something for them, just like, the technical person in the family might deal with the router for the family and things like that. So I guess maybe the idea then is as long as the tooling can be built out in such a way that at least if the technical person in each family or in that group of friends can be proverbial Uncle Jim, as my friend Matt Odell would say, right?
Yeah, if you've got one technical person in your household who you can trust to set up a Raspberry Pi, then all the members of that house can easily point their wallets at it, and maybe you want to share some Lightning channel liquidity to save on on-chain fees and things like this. And maybe you don't want to use our Mempool Explorer instance, but your Uncle Jim is running one, so you use his because he's not going to sell your data to blockchain analysis firm, right? So it's all about being able to choose who you trust, right? If you want to build it yourself and run it yourself and trust yourself, that's great. But if not, you should still have the option of who to trust. So you don't have to just trust the government or trust the central bank. You can trust Uncle Jim because he's your family, and that's a really cool capability to have that option.
Cool. And what about, I guess, ongoing, just in terms of keeping the project running, there's obviously got to be some operating costs in terms of servers and, I mean, the time for you guys to develop and maintain these things. Do you have any thoughts on how the project will be made sustainable for the longer term?
Yeah, I mean, now I feel we're finally ready after working on this project for a couple of years to call it like a real serious open source project and apply for some grants. Maybe we'll set up a Mempool Foundation or something. I don't know. It's community funded, right? So we have a sponsors page, including like yourself and a number of other very well respected Bitcoiners have signed up as sponsors. Where if you donate 1 million Sats, you get your photo on our about page. So we're totally community funded and developing this project for the community, funded by the community, built by the Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners kind of thing. So it feels very wholesome and heartwarming. The love from the community, both in terms of just the number of users and apps integrating with our site, and as well as seeing like how much donations we'll be getting too. So hopefully that'll continue to support us, and we'll be able to not turn into an evil company, but stay as a happy open source project, right?
Awesome. And in terms of the future of the project, are there any other things you wanted to highlight in terms of features or things that you're looking to work on? And maybe tell us a little bit about what's going on, just a refresher of what's happening with the Raspberry Pi support as well.
Yeah, we're continuously expanding our Raspberry Pi support. So we're going to support Umbrel, MyNode, Ronin Dojo. There's one called Start9 Labs, I think. So we work
The embassy.
yeah, right now. And I think the biggest new feature that I hope to start working on this year is like a Lightning Explorers thing. So, and because that is what most of the Bitcoin ecosystem is moving towards right now. So that feels like the most important next step. And then I don't know yet if it's possible, but it would be great if it's possible to use it on a Raspberry Pi as well. So you can support everything.
Actually, on that, on the Lightning Node Explorer, I'm curious how feasible that will be, because I understand right now in the ECDSA kind of world, it's easier to identify on-chain Lightning channel opens and closes. But theoretically, if we got Taproot and most people upgrade to that, then it might actually start to become less visible on-chain, which one is a channel open and which one's a channel close and stuff, right?
Exactly. So we have a feature now. If you go to a transaction, we flag like this is a two multisig transaction. This is a Lightning close, for example, stuff like that. But as transactions are moving to Taproot, everything like that's going to be invisible. So we're not going to be able to like do this connection anymore, I think. think, but it's going to be a transition. So it's going to work like the coming years, probably, most probably. And people are still going to need to use like a Lightning Explorer tool when they're going to set up their new Lightning node. They're going, the first question is like, okay, so who to open my channels to? So they need like a tool to provide them which channels need incoming liquidity, for example, which nodes have the best routing in the network. So I think that is a big key thing that we need to focus on up next up.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that point because I know the Lightning Labs team have this thing called BOS scoring. And so then you might want to try to figure out, who you need to connect to in terms of who's a good node to connect to. And theoretically in the Lightning Network, if you want to be a good routing node, then you theoretically want to open channels in the direction that people want pay. So if there's some way that, the user can have like a dashboard that has that information. Now, I mean, that could also maybe be done on Lightning dashboards like RTL or Thunderhub and Lit, but it could potentially also be part of Mempool.space as well, right?
Yeah, I think it makes sense for the mempool because we are the explorer, right? You search for transactions block, and you also will be able to search for Lightning nodes and channels. And we are supporting like all the layer 2 networks now, so we will just continue expand and support and see where the ecosystem is going. Follow that.
And I also like the point that you made earlier, Wiz, about, well, it's that new feature that shows you which transactions have fallen out of the default mempool, because that will then give the user an indicator that they need to do something about this now, right? They need to try, if they can, to RBF, replace by fee, or CPFP on the other side to get the recipient to try to accelerate that transaction, or to use some kind of transaction accelerator, right?
Yeah, I really want to like improve the user experience because I get so many people that they send me like a link to Mempool.space and say, hey, my transaction got stuck. What do I do? So we really need this explanation because people usually don't get what's going on. So we need to like explain, this is how long until it will get confirmed. You can use this and this method, like replace by fee. And we also flag, like if you go to a transaction, you see like green or yellow or red and like flags like, oh, this transaction support replaced by fee, or this one has support SegWit, and you put a decent fee. But if everything is like blinking red, you know that something is not good. You need improvement. Like maybe you need to change to a better wallet and stuff like that. So we're like really trying to help people like realize what's going on. Why is their transaction stuck? And like, oh, you can, and like, as a last option, you're like, oh, you can maybe go to this site or do a transaction, pay for a transaction acceleration.
Yeah, I think it's the stated goal of our project to basically help the community optimize their on-chain usage and essentially migrate to the upper layers of the Bitcoin ecosystem. So it's really cool to, like Simon is saying, be able to paste in a TXID, analyze your transaction, have the site suggest ways in which you can improve or optimize your on-chain usage and save on fees. And for example, if say there's 3 ways to improve to bump a fee, you can RBF it, you can CPFP it, or you can manually accelerate it by bribing one of the mining pools to accelerate it. Then we could have those 3 buttons there. But if your transaction does not have the capability for RBF set, then maybe one of those buttons would be grayed out with like a little error message that says, oh, your transaction is not RBF capable, maybe you should switch to wallet. And then we could actually educate the user with a comparison of wallets, or explain at least how to do the other options that are available to them, like CPFP, and just kind of explain that because we get like a million emails from random users like, help, my transaction's not confirming, can you please confirm it? And I always refer them to Simon, who's in charge of confirming the transaction. But I mean, that's the joke, right? Is that we're just an explorer. We don't control anything of the network. We're just observing it. But the users really, a lot of the users really think that we're the mempool, right? Which of course doesn't exist.
Oh, poor users. I mean, it's funny, but also sad. Like, it's also like, oh man, that's because I can imagine you guys get a ton of emails or people hitting you up saying, oh, hey, please confirm this for me. And you're like, well, I can't actually help you, mate. Well, I can sort of help you, but I can't really.
Yeah, so that's what we want to improve. We want to actually be able to help these users. Maybe we'll partner with some mining pools and have their acceleration features on the site. Maybe we'll have some wallet link to some wallets where it'll teach the users how to RBF it or CPFP it in the future. So that'll be like the I guess the next goals of the short term of the site.
Yeah, and as an ecosystem, I guess it is going to now go towards wallets that have RBF, and we might even start defaulting to RBF on, where maybe historically that was not always the done thing, because back in the older days, people could just go 1 sat per byte and wait, or lowball it and wait, where now it's more like there really is a chance in this next year or two that we hit that level of block space market, such that there is a real risk that your transaction falls out of the default mempool, does not get relayed, does not get mined, etc.
Yeah, I think the mempool is going to become this living, breathing beast, right? Where you have a wallet, and currently you pick a fee and you broadcast a transaction, and the wallet basically forgets about it at that point. But I feel that you're not really going to be able to do that anymore. Now, wallets are probably going to need to constantly monitor where the transaction is in the mempool, and if it falls behind a certain threshold based on the user's priority or time preference, it might want to RBF that up to avoid getting purged or really buried down deep in the mempool. You might want to stay, within the next few projected blocks or something like this. And so in theory, you could start the transaction out, with a medium fee, and within every few minutes, maybe bump it up a little bit, just waiting and seeing how things go. There's a lot of things that wallets could do to improve their RBF functionality.
Actually, I'm curious, while we're here, are you only able to RBF it one time?
I think you're able to RBF it unlimited times.
Yeah, the number is very high, right?
And also, we actually have a unique feature on the Mempool.space website that actually detects RBF. So you get like a dialog showing up, this transaction has been replaced, and you are taken to the new one. But I also like to add to, like, when I watching the Mempool all day and stuff, I see so many efficiencies going on, and people are using old wallets and they're using exchanges that hasn't implemented SegWit, and maybe you're doing a coffee payment on chain and stuff. So I mean, there's so much left to optimize, and I guess this is the nature of the voluntary system that Bitcoin is. Like, nobody can force everyone to just upgrade to the better protocol, better addresses or something. So usually when people complain about fees and stuff, they're actually running an old wallet that are just using legacy addresses, which makes the transaction fee actually twice as much as what it would have been with a SegWit transaction. And then they are not able to RBF it, and then it gets stuck. So that's why we're really trying to help people take the decision and leave their wallet, change another wallet. And there's a lot of infrastructure out there that hasn't been upgraded. So there's a lot of inefficiency.
Yeah, if you're a business that's profitable, making regular Bitcoin transactions, and you're probably busy on scaling up that business, whether it be an exchange or anything, and you're usually passing on the withdrawal fees to the users anyway. So as the centralized exchange operator, there isn't a huge financial interest to implement SegWit or do batching or other optimization until the users are really, really pissed about the fees. And we saw this with BitMEX. I remember once it cost like $75 or $100 to do a withdrawal transaction from BitMEX back in 2018 or something, when the mempool was very congested. And now we're seeing that they're optimizing things finally. And BISC too. BISC is a decentralized network, so the interests are more aligned with the community. But it was just a big technical challenge to implement SegWit in the trade protocol itself. So it's a huge amount of work for these both centralized and decentralized platforms to optimize their transactions. And it is a risk if they screw something up, they might lose some funds. So you really have to work hard on it. It's a lot easier for them to just say, oh yeah, we'll just pass the fees on to the user, right? So I can see why the community is always slow to kind of adopt the new technologies or optimize things further. But the financial incentives will only get stronger and stronger and stronger to do that. Say it cost, BISC $150,000 to pay developers to implement SegWit into the trade protocol. Well, at some point, the users will be, losing more than $150,000 in additional mining fees they could have saved. So at some point, it makes sense to do it, right?
Yeah, really interesting stuff. I'm curious if you guys have any other funny observations in terms of what you see happening on the mempool. Is there any other kind of funny off-the-wall kind of behaviors that you see there?
Well, I think it's very interesting and important to to reflect that. We see that today we are like in a new bull market, and the fees are like $1 now or even less to make a transaction, and we're not congested at all compared to was it 4 years ago, when like the end of the bull market 17, when it was crazy backlog of like hundreds thousands of transactions. And so now we're already back at those levels, but the blockchain isn't nearly as congested because of all the optimizations that has taken place the past few years. So when people complain that we need to raise the block size or something, the fees are too high, I mean, the only thing that can solve that is economic incentives for people to do more, use the block space more efficiently, do batching, do SegWit, and go do stuff on off-chain. I mean, I see a lot of people sending like just from exchanges. That's like a huge part of the mempool. People just sending between, maybe the buy on Coinbase, the same send to Binance. I mean, that transfer could have been occurred off chain instead, like using the Liquid network, which is actually built for inter-exchange settlement. I would just remove a huge part of the mempool congestion, and the fees will go down again. That's why I'm a bit optimistic about fees actually going forward. I think we could like 10x the amount of Bitcoin users the coming like 4 years, but still like keep a smaller, keep a not too high fee level, because the economic incentives are there to force people to actually optimize, and that's a good thing when the fees go up.
Yeah, that's a really cool point.
Right, but even if the fee rate in terms of satoshis per byte that you're paying doesn't go up and it stays the same over the next 4 years, price of Bitcoin in US dollars is going to go up probably another 10x, right? So in fiat prices, the Bitcoin transaction costs are still going to go way up, and I think that's even stronger incentive, to optimize these transactions. And now I'm on the Liquid board, and I hear some interesting stuff. Like there'll be two large centralized exchanges that send a ton of transactions to each other, and they could put all of these transactions onto a sidechain like Liquid. And there's even data to show this to the exchange operators, but for whatever reason, they're not very interested to implement it because they don't pay the fees, and they like the security of using the Bitcoin blockchain to settle all these things. So it'll be interesting to see who actually takes what actions to optimize what transactions, and what gets moved off chain, what stays on chain. The future is bright, right? Like all around, we're going to have more tools and more infrastructure and more optimizations coming together, along with the number going up, incentivizing all of it, right?
Yeah, that's a really great point about the fiat value rise, because as I understand, in the earlier days, there were people paying fees, literally multiple Bitcoins in fees, but the fiat value was just so much lower back then. Whereas now, the fiat value obviously is much, much higher. As we speak today, what is it? Something like 36,000 USD for one Bitcoin. So in Bitcoin terms, fees have come down quite a lot. It's just that in fiat terms, they've gone up a lot. And so that's an interesting point, and we should probably anticipate that to continue. One other point I think I'd love to get your thoughts on, because you guys are obviously, so much more involved with the mempool. I think we potentially see this kind of seesaw effect of, as the fees rise, then the engineers go to work and the companies get an incentive to start doing batching and SegWit and use Lightning and use Liquid. And then maybe the seesaw kind of tips the other way, because now they've made it so efficient that, fees become really cheap again. And then you have to wait for another, big uptick in adoption before you see the congestion rise again. So it's kind of like this back and forth seesaw effect. What's your thoughts? Do you think that's the likely way this goes, or do you see it more just like, no, it's just going to be continued, on-chain congestion from now on, and now you just have to use Mempool.space and other tools to deal with it?
Yeah, I think you're right about the seesaw effect. And more realistically, you'll probably, up until now, we've seen where the mempool was just not full all the time, and you could always get away with doing the minimum 1 sat per byte. But now I think what we're going to see, and we've already been seeing it like the past month or two, is that even though the going fee rate is only like 10 or 12 sats per VByte on the weekends now, there's still this huge backlog of low fee transactions, like from maybe like 3 or 4 sats to 8 or 10 sats or something. And just tens of thousands of transactions they're getting churned out on the weekends, but it never really clears out. And so now you're seeing what before there was no floor, where the floor was 1.0 sats per VByte. Now that floor is variable, and it's probably going to rise up to like 4 or 5 sats per VByte. So you will see the seesaw effect, but more importantly and more relevantly to most users is that the 1.0 sat days, I think, are kind of gone. Maybe now it's more like a 4 or 5 sat per vbyte if you don't want to get purged out of the mempool.
Yeah, very interesting and insightful comments there. Anything else you guys wanted to mention about the project?
Well, I guess if you want to know what's going on with your transaction, if it's stuck in the mempool, check it out on Mempool.space. And if you really like the project, you can self-host it on a Raspberry Pi. There's even shops selling Raspberry Pis preloaded with Raspberry Blitz on the Fulmo store, where you can buy a mempool Raspberry Pi, very low price. If you want to support the project, or report some issues to our GitHub or some features you'd like to see, you can just create an issue on our project page. Or if you want to donate some funds, you can become a sponsor on the Mempool.space about page. And really just hit us up on Keybase or Twitter whenever you want to ask us anything at all. We're very happy to work with the community on anything you want to see added to the site.
Fantastic. Well, I'll include links in the show notes, and I really like the project, so I wish you guys well, and thanks for all the great work you're doing, and thank you for joining me on the show today.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Stefan.
Find the show notes at stefanlivera.com. Thanks, and I will see you in the Citadels.